a second because I'm turning on recording, but it looks as though that is up and running. So, oh, and I see somebody put on together mode. So there we all are, nice and friendly in what look like some excellent stone benches in our amphitheater or something. So anyway, welcome to office hours, everybody. Great to see so many of us joining. I've got just a couple of things to share at the very top of the call, and then we'll do what we always do, which is to open it up for questions. The couple of things are that I imagine most folks on the call are familiar with the fact that today at 5 p.m. is the deadline we established for challenges submitted before that time will receive feedback from us if in the event the challenge has to be rejected, the reason why that challenge was rejected. We absolutely will continue to process challenges that we receive all the way through the deadline, the challenge submission period deadline of 11:59 p.m. next Tuesday, April 30. However, challenges that we receive after 5 today and before that deadline are going to be accepted or rejected based on what we see in the evidence without feedback that guides you in potential resubmission should you choose to go that route. Thing two that I would like to share. We received an influx of user account requests earlier today. We're excited to see that folks are engaging in the challenge process, and we're glad to have those. We have processed all of the user requests. With that said, we see a few of those. It's a two-step process, as everybody who's registered will know, right? You request, and then you receive an email back that invites you to complete your registration. We do see a handful of folks that have not completed their account registration, even though they just requested their account. If you're one of them in that situation, please do look for that email to accept your account because it does expire. We've heard of a few folks who, have had that request land in their junk folder or their spam folder. So check all those places before you do tell us that you need us to, or before you request an account again, please. The third thing I will say is that a few folks have experienced, probably more than a few folks have told us they experienced, and so we think a lot of folks are experiencing that the site is running a bit slowly, as you would imagine, and probably as you were involved in being part of. There's a lot of folks who are actively engaged in the portal yesterday and today. Our developers are actively working to deploy additional resources that will help the site decrease its processing time, improve its responsiveness during this high demand. With that said, the best practice if you are struggling to get something specific submitted and you want to get it in before that 5 p.m. deadline, we would encourage you, if you're working on a bulk challenge, right, and it's got 15,000 locations in it, we would encourage you, for example, to consider trying to cut that into 3 groups of 5,000 each. That might also decrease the number of files that you'd be submitting as evidence. And it is apparently the experience that folks are having that decreasing those sizes is resulting in a little bit more efficient processing. With that said, if you have hit submit on anything, whether it's a rebuttal or a challenge that you're submitting, do go ahead and give it the processing time. Let it finish its loading. If you do try to click that submit button again, that will in some cases cause errors. So that is the top of the call. Those are the things that I have to share. And now I'm ready to just say, let's have folks raise their hands and we'll take questions in the order they come up. Hey, I see your hand.
Okay, go ahead. I don't know if you're having audio problems. We kind of hear you cutting in and out.
No, it was operator error. So I just want to make sure I didn't miss something. When I looked through the guidelines and when I rewatched prior webinars, I didn't see anything. I've been submitting challenges and I've received a love note or two relative to rebuttal opportunities.
Yeah.
But all of that has to be done directly in the portal, I can't like download a list of everything I've submitted thus far or download a list of the rebuttals that have come in, correct?
That is correct. There's not a download option available in the portal right now.
Okay.
It
I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah.
wasn't missing.
No, you're not. You're not. I would say to you that we know that some folks have discovered that it copies and pastes pretty nicely into a spreadsheet program of your choice. And so that is an option if you do want to pull it into something that you can sort or manipulate in a different way outside the sort options available in the portal.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. And then, so the only way the follow up to that is when I look at, I'm going to make up the numbers, but 20 352 in my portal. It'll say challenges, 20 of 352. That just means you have reviewed 20 and either kicked them back or forwarded them on, right? The others are still awaiting your review.
Yes, that is what that
Okay.
would mean.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to answer those questions.
I'm not as far off base as I thought I was.
No, I think you're doing great. I think you're doing great. The vast majority of folks, I think, are seeing their challenges move through the process. Just as kind of a window to what it looks like on our side, we're currently floating with it's a little bit below 40,000 challenges that we have for our review right now. We are clearing those as quickly as we're able because we know that folks are anxious for those results and that feedback. But we do have long to-do lists, even though we're moving down them as quickly as we can. Jackie, it looks like your hand might be up next.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Or can.
So this goes afterward and hopefully it's just a me problem. But we've submitted quite a few mainly CAI related challenges.
Mhm.
We started on the 2nd, but we have some as early as the 9th of April. And we haven't gotten any feedback from any of our submissions so far. So I wasn't
Okay.
sure if I wanted to kind of bring that to your attention,
Yeah.
just because, you've said that, hey, you're getting through them, but I just wanted to advocate and just kind of
Yeah.
verify that we haven't fallen through the cracks here.
Yeah.
And
So,
I've submitted some pretty recently, so I
yeah.
understand that some of those recent ones, they're
Yeah.
happening all at once.
Yep. So all of the challenges that flow through the portal, if the challenge is accepted, then I believe you'll receive like an automated, but you won't receive feedback from us that will say, your evidence met the standards for the following reasons. It'll just be we've accepted your challenge. You will get that. You should get that notification email, but you also can watch the challenge move essentially through the different sections in your portal or your dashboard, I should say.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about with the dashboard. It still says awaiting review or awaiting rebuttal, and none of the statuses have changed.
Okay. That very well may be correct, but we certainly can take a look at it as well. We are committed to getting through these as quickly as we can, but that is just a reality of we do have a lot to process right now.
Sure. And I'll verify those emails. I thought they were just more, we received it, and maybe I misread a couple of those emails that said
Yeah.
accepted.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Nathan, it looks like you're up next.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Jessica, and good afternoon, everyone. Just quick question here. So I've been hearing that hundreds, if not thousands, of addresses were entered this morning, it looks like by the city of Wyandotte. Just kind of curious if you guys had any idea how that was done so swiftly. Is that an individual thing? Is that draw tool? Any ideas?
I do, yeah. And I don't know whether or not our friends from the city of Wyandotte joined the call or not. I don't recognize their names in our queue right here. If I'm wrong and somebody from the city is on the phone and wants to, or on the call and wants to speak specifically, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. That said, it's my understanding that they did use the draw tool. I'd had conversation with Joe from the city who was working through that process last night.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Happy to.
While we're
Francine, I see
waiting
your
for
hand.
that next question, Jess, I wonder if it'd be appropriate to let everybody know that we have gotten multiple reports of slower speeds in the portal today with all the
Yeah.
traffic that's coming in.
Yep. And our best practice, I think, recommendation here would be one, if you have the ability to kind of chunk things out and reduce your file sizes, that seems to be helping some folks who are in a position to do that. And two, just try to be patient with the portal. Once you've hit your submit button or your confirm button or whatever your submission is, depending on which screen you're on, try to wait it out and let it process. Clicking that submission button a second time in many cases will trigger the red error box that folks are seeing in their upper right hand corner. So we're dealing with it here within MyHigh as we review challenges, just like folks are dealing with it as you submit challenges, but just try to let it take the time to do the uploader processing. And our developers are doing what they can to try to deploy some additional resources to support the portal through this time. I see Francine next.
Hi, thank you. So Lenawee County here. I have two questions. So I've been working with people in the county who have been calling who are unable to get access and working with some providers. So when I went to put their address in, it says that it's unserviceable. So there is nowhere to put for the challenge. And then it said to check, there was something to push to have the map for service, but there's nowhere that it's not allowing me to go. So it's an address that I've been dealing with. One of the providers gave a quote because they're 1,000 feet off of the road, and it won't let me put a challenge in.
Okay. So when you're saying it says it's unserviceable, is that on michiganbroadbandmap.com or is that on the provider's website that it's defining that location as unserviceable?
It's on the challenge site. Let me put it in right now. It says, this address is not found in our record of broadband serviceable locations. And then it says flag address for review by Michigan Broadband Office. But when I push on it, it doesn't take me anywhere to flag it.
Okay.
Yeah, can I interrupt? I know I raised
Yeah,
my
of
hand,
course.
but
You're fine.
I ran into that exact same problem. And let me tell you what I did as a workaround. Maybe it will work for you. It came up, or an address would come up, and it would be an address different than what I searched. So what I ended up doing was resorting in those cases to the actual map, zooming out and trying to find the yellow dot or the red dot and clicking through those dots until I found the address, and then did the challenge at that point. So sorry, it didn't mean to
No.
interrupt, but I just, because I was flagging and I'm like, what the poo? And then figured out that I could work around it.
Yeah. And Kay, what you're describing is exactly what I was about to recommend. So I think we're all, the two of us at least, are both right there in the same place. The address search function obviously is underpinned by a mapping database that is not it's not like a mapping database that we developed. It's an interface there. But the broadband serviceable location pinpoints on the map do align with the fabric. As folks have heard me say ad infinitum on these office hours, right? It's BDC version 3 as updated February through February 7, 2024. And so for the broadly speaking, most of those emails, most of those addresses will search and land on the point they're supposed to, but sometimes they don't line up exactly like we would want them to. And in those cases, the workaround of navigating on the map is probably our best practice there.
Yeah, and Francine, just know that sometimes the dot might not be on the street. So you kind of have to look broadly to find the dot you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, and I will play around with it, but okay, I'll try. I've really tried to look at this one. My second question is, in our county, it says that Mercury is provided service to all these people, which is not true. Like I cannot find anyone who has Mercury, right? And so to go in there, you know, we've done some challenges with some people who have had questions about that. But who do I address this with if they say they provide service, but nobody has service with Mercury?
Yeah. So
thank you.
I'm gonna answer that question in, I think, 3 parts, and I guess we'll all find out together if I am going to stick to those 3 bullet points as I say the things I'm about to say. Point 1 is that just like is that any provider, right, can be challenged with what we would call an availability service is not available type challenge. That kind of is exactly what it says in the title, right? It's a location where a provider reports providing service can be challenged with an availability service is not available challenge when there exists evidence that that service does not actually reach to that location. The standards for what it takes to demonstrate or what evidence is necessary to sufficiently demonstrate that challenge should be upheld are identified in our user guide. That's the first point that I would point you to in terms of the type of challenge that would be necessary for any provider and any place where you believe service has been reported that doesn't actually exist. The second thing that I would lift up is when you have a concern that there is a broad pattern across a geographic area of potential availability services not available challenges, or there actually are other types of challenges that are similarly to this, but this is what you're asking about, so this is what I'm speaking about. There is an opportunity for something called an area challenge. The specifics of that are detailed in Initial Proposal Volume 1, but also in the user guide. Broadly speaking, what an area challenge means is that if there's a pattern in a census block group of the same type of challenge against the same provider and the same provider's technology, if we hit a threshold that in many census block groups is 6 challenges to that same provider, same technology, in census block groups that are very low density, right? So it's places that have fewer than 65 broadband serviceable locations in the census block group. If we hit that threshold value, then what essentially happens is the burden of proof shifts. And so the area challenge process, and again, I'm summarizing this, but you can hop into the particulars in the Initial Proposal Volume 1 or the user guide. So the area challenge then says, essentially, we see a pattern of challenges where the evidence has been accepted for these type of challenges in this area. And therefore, we are going to look at, for a wired technology, so that's, you know, your fiber, your cable, your whatever, we're going to ask that provider to demonstrate that they have infrastructure to serve all the locations that they're claiming to serve in that census block group. For a fixed wireless provider, then there is a sampling procedure to demonstrate to require them to make that same demonstration at a representative random sample of the locations in ways that require like physically providing speed tests at those sampled locations. So if you have a concern that you have availability services not available type issues across an area, then we encourage you to take a look at the area challenge information. And the last point I would like to make is that information has been made available to eligible challengers throughout the state upon request about research that MyHigh did into fixed wireless availability. That is information that's available to anyone who follows the request procedure that is detailed in the appendix. And so if you're interested in seeing that information and determining whether area challenges might have been triggered in areas that you're concerned about, and therefore you don't need to do additional challenges because that area challenge has already been triggered in your area, then just follow that request procedure and we're happy to share. I think that's all. That was a lot, but it was 3 points.
Thank you.
Hey, Jess, before we go on to the next raised hand, there was a question in the chat about CAI data. And once
Yeah.
it's received during the challenge process, how and what will happen with that data, and if it will update the FCC map or if it's specific to the BEAD map. I think I'm summarizing that. If
Yeah.
not, Rachel, please correct us so we get it on the recording if that wasn't the question.
Okay. So when we think about the FCC map and CAI mapping, the FCC map follows like what the FCC is mandated to map and to track by the federal legislation that directed it to begin the BDC direction or the BDC collection process. They don't have a mandate to track community anchor institutions. And so community anchor institutions at this moment in time, I do not believe are wholesale going to come onto the FCC map. And that's not something that MyHigh can control or do anything other than explain the situation to FCC and request them to do what they can to improve the mapping of those particular locations. The reason that there's particularly inconsistency around CAI locations as compared to broadband serviceable locations, kind of your more standard homes and businesses, is a direct result of that, is that there doesn't exist a fabric of CAIs in the same way there does exist a fabric of homes and businesses. And so the points that have been placed on the map begin with research that MyHigh had to do to compile the literally first ever list of community anchor institutions in Michigan. We did our best to find authoritative data sources, and we did a process that obviously then of locating them onto the map. With that said, obviously there are lots of places that do need to be updated and corrected. The good part about working through the process of updating those locations is that the updated locations will be mapped for purposes of identifying the BEAD eligible locations in the state of Michigan and placing them into the mapping that will be used for subgrant project design. That said, there does not exist between NTIA and FCC a plan to make those data sets pull over. And so the results of the state challenge process will not flow into the FCC's broadband data collection process as everybody understands the rules at this time. If that changes, then that certainly is something that we will share with everybody as we're able. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
What about on the state's behalf? So, or
Mhm.
so just kind of thinking toward the future and things, once the BEAD funding and processing has been completed or is in process and we've been working from that map, any other challenges and things, say for like digital equity in the future, if we need community anchor institutions in regards to those kinds of grant process and everything. Is all of this information being gathered by the state? Would that be used for state initiatives and challenges for that? Or just because the FCC and NTIA don't have that map, would we have to be entering that information again once those challenges come around? Or is there
Yeah.
any way that that information that we're entering now is going to be retained so that we can potentially use it in the future?
Yeah. Um, our intention is absolutely to produce the best available mapping in an ongoing way um, for the state of Michigan that allows people to do things like track the progress of BEAD grants. Um, I, in all honesty, cannot really speak to the future interaction with the FCC mapping process at this point. But your point is very well taken about the level of effort that everybody is going to and the work that we need to continue to do to make sure things are as accurate as possible. That's probably as far as I can go on it at this point, but the point is very well taken.
I think that's fair. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Mitchell had his hand up next.
Okay, I've got a few questions about CAI challenges. Well, first of all, sort of to piggyback on Jackie's exchange with Jessica, my understanding, my expectation has been that, well, in the last couple of days, Tuesday and Wednesday, I submitted about a dozen CAI speed challenges. Previous to that, we had submitted, as Jackie had mentioned, location challenges was sort of the first step that we did when the location was wrong. And I know we're getting close to the end, so I'm wondering right now, my CAI speed challenges are awaiting review. And am I correct to assume that if it goes to awaiting rebuttal, that is a notification, if not, direct, it's an indication
Mhm.
that that challenge has been accepted as valid and it moves into the rebuttal phase. So would that be
Exactly
the
right. Yeah.
most reliable? I mean, I am sure you've got, between the emails and the phone calls, lots of things in the pipeline, but to watch that is one indicator. I think you're saying yes. Okay.
Mhm.
So, and anything you can say about if, let's say, I think I submitted like 9 on Tuesday and 4 on yesterday afternoon,
Mhm.
when that might be reviewed. I know you're probably swamped
Yeah.
with lots of people asking that, wondering about that question, but any expectation setting that you think is realistic at this point?
Um, I don't think I can make any sort of commitment there at all. No. We are doing the best that we can to review as quickly as we can. Um, I guess the one thing I will say is that in a call we had with the developers early and most of the MyHigh team earlier today, there were references about how differently the portal performs between 9 and 11 p.m. as opposed to between 9 and 11 a.m. So if that gives you some sense of the level of effort that we are going to try to get these things reviewed and back to you, um, that's pretty much as I can uh, as much as I can share.
Okay, and then the third question, which is partly why I'm concerned about the timing and when we'll get notification, is that there were a number of issues that we ran into, and one was because some of the addresses were incorrect, and sometimes there was, I think, at least one where we had to get it added. So what I found is that I was And to enter a speed challenge, you need to click on a triangle. It seemed to be the case. So sometimes I was clicking on a triangle that was the wrong address. I think in one case, maybe because we were asking to have that CI added, I had no triangle, so I clicked on the same triangle I did for the building, the CAI that was right next to it. So I guess the question maybe is, and what I tried to do is to explain the location issues that we were doing, what the right location is, what the wrong location is,
Yeah.
include screenshots, and even the challenge ID
Yep.
numbers for the location challenge that we had previously filed, just to make it easy to say, okay, this is what's going on. And I guess I'm hoping that what we did will be helpful, and of course will be accepted as a valid challenge. But I guess I'll just have to wait and see, unless you can, I mean, if you can shed any light on that issue of the triangle is required, but if it's the wrong address or it's not even, there isn't any address for
Yep.
that location.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is part of the reason that it feels like it's taking us a long time to review these challenges is because we really genuinely are reading and reviewing all of the different pieces that are submitted with each of these challenges. And the notes fields, when they are used properly to convey information, are helpful. The second thing that I would say is that speed tests are tied to the particular point, whether it's a type S challenge or whether it is a type G or Q challenge. The speed tests are tied to the particular place on the map that you click. And so those things will track together based on that location-based ID, right? Like everything about the BEAD program as a whole, including the BEAD State Challenge process, is tied pinpoint by pinpoint, location by location. The third thing I would say is that to the extent that folks have that limited case scenario of a type C challenge that needs to be submitted to us by email, if you have specific information that you would submit as either a type G or type Q challenge, so it's a CAI speed information that is relevant to the location you're submitting with your type C, then you can, and in fact, we would really appreciate if you did have that specific information, that you put it in that email that you send to us. Now, if you're doing a type C challenge for a standard BSL location that you need to have changed into a CAI icon on the map, CAI designation, but it's already there as a standard location, do that type G or type Q challenge on that point on the map. Only if you have a type C challenge where you need to add a whole new point to the map, there is not currently a location represented at the location that you need to challenge, or the location that you need to place that CAI, would we be able to look at that availability information through the email? But that is an option that is available.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm understanding, because the emails were sent way in advance of the gathering of the information, and we're not really using speed tests. We're just, it's about the actual availability of the gigabit, the symmetrical gigabit. So
Yeah.
That hopefully will be, it will be tied to, in all cases except for one, will be tied to the wrong address with the right CAI name. So it'll be identified with the CAI, but the location won't be the correct address. And since we didn't do a speed test, it doesn't really matter, at least in my understanding, that the address was wrong, because we're not doing a speed test at that address, that there's not fiber connection available to the correct address.
Yep.
But we had to use the triangle of the wrong address to actually submit the challenge. Otherwise, there was no option to submit a challenge. So I'm talking mostly about that speed challenge that isn't a speed test based, and where the address is incorrect, but the triangle is needed.
Yeah,
So.
the type G and type Q challenges. Yeah. We will do all that we can to tie those things together on the back end. But if you have type G or type Q information about a location that had to be emailed to us, if you include that information in the email, that's helpful, flowing together in one information stream. If you were able to pull up the email that you submitted and do like a reply on that chain that would add in that information, that would be helpful. But like I said, we will do as much tying together as we can where those things are clear to us in the information we have received.
Thing we can do is, so for those where we needed to send an email, we could put in some clarifying information in the email thread so that you can connect it there. What I did when I did the qualifying CAA qualifying speed challenge was just note that an email was sent, and so that's one thing we can do. And in the other cases, I included the location challenge ID, which I hope would be linked. You could then link it to that and say, okay, so this was the wrong address. We submitted a challenge saying this is the wrong address, this is the right address. In the speed challenge, which followed later, I included the challenge ID for the this isn't, and this is. So that's a way of linking those because they didn't require any emails. But the one that required an email, we can additionally send some explanatory linking information in the email thread.
Yes.
That we sent to you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just keep our fingers crossed and watch the awaiting status. And good luck with all the traffic. Thank you.
I think we're gonna make it through together.
Yes.
We're gonna make it through together.
Are you going to throw a party for everyone at? Well, actually, it's premature. It's like on to the next phase. So there's
That's
not a lot
exactly
of
right.
break.
No, that's exactly right. And I think that's a good and important thing to lift up, right? Is that the challenge submission phase ends on April 30, and then we move forward with every challenge has a rebuttal opportunity associated with it. Many times, challenges flow directly to a challenged provider. Other times, challenges flow into the open rebuttals list. In that case, or whichever the case might be, each challenge has a rebuttal opportunity that lasts now for 40 days, extended from 30, but lasts for 40 days from or the rebuttal opportunity notification was provided. So that means that some rebuttals are available right now. Some rebuttals will not become available for several days yet because it'll depend on, when the challenge is submitted and then when it is reviewed and accepted by MyHigh. And so we'll move forward with our rebuttal phases and we make final determinations once rebuttals are either submitted and reviewed, or if we reach the end of the rebuttal opportunity and no rebuttal was made, then that challenge would stand as it was accepted. From there, we, MyHigh, have the obligation to then do a lot of data reconciliation and cleanup on our back end, and it'll be all submitted to NTIA. We've said no later than July 22 because that's our 120-day time frame, and we are required to be done within that time frame. So yes, April 30th ends the challenge submission period, but certainly doesn't end the challenge process.
Yes, and I'll just add, I won't reiterate what I said in the email to MyHigh, but
Yep.
Anything that could make it easier to deal with these open rebuttals be greatly appreciated. Appreciate the extra 10 days, but anyway, so I'll just leave it at that. I sent the email. No need to discuss it here, and you've already made some reference to it. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Jessica.
We noticed the same thing that Mitch is describing, which is that list of open rebuttals is getting long. It's only going to get longer. We've been discussing with our developers what options might exist to make it more time, but it is something that we will share as we are able and will publish as we are able. I see Madeline Snyder has her hand up. So Madeline, do you want to go ahead and unmute?
Sure, thank you so much. I have a question, and I was just wondering if you could just confirm that there's nothing else we have to do on our end. I work for a nonprofit, and we submitted a challenge to designate our locations as a community anchor institution. It says that they're awaiting review. Is there anything else that we need to do? We submitted the evidence, and
Mhm.
is there anything we would need to do if a rebuttal is open? Like, we're a little bit confused about that.
Yeah. Um, the only thing that we would ask you to do is just watch out for a notification either that the challenge was accepted or rejected. That'll come to you once we've had the opportunity to review the information that you shared. Um, once a rebuttal, specifically for a CAI challenge to be designated as a CAI, that challenge, once assuming it's accepted, once it's accepted, would be placed into the open rebuttals list. It would be open then for those 40 days for anybody to submit countervailing evidence. And in the event that that happened, we would review that evidence against your initial submission and determine whether the challenge should be sustained and the type C challenge, and therefore that location should be designated a CAI, or if the rebuttal should be sustained, and in that case, the location would not be designated CAI. So there's really not a lot for you to do at this point other than watch for updates.
Okay, that sounds great. So, um, if it's accepted and then put on like the open rebuttal list, we wouldn't necessarily do anything because it's not like
That's
we're
right.
rebutting the claim that we put in. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. Yep.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thanks for joining, and thanks for being part of the challenge process. I know um, it's not a it's not a small undertaking by any means on any side by anybody who is involved.
Hey, Jessica, we've got a few
Yeah.
questions over in the chat. I think starting with David came in a little late, so he's asking if we spoke about the challenge for location.
Um, so we generally have had a policy of not speaking about any particular challenge, and I don't know um, about, I honestly can't tell from the information that you've shared about which particular challenge you might be referring to. If the challenge was not accepted, then you should have received feedback about the reason it was not accepted. If you have interest in resubmitting that challenge, what we would encourage you to do is to consider what was said to you in that feedback note, and then in addition, um, to pick up the user guide and take careful look at the standards that are described in there and the examples that are listed, especially in the appendices that talk about the different types of challenge and the standards for evidence associated with them. Same thing with rebuttals if that's what you're working on as a rebuttal instead of a challenge. And then if you do have evidence that you believe meets those standards, we would encourage you to go ahead and resubmit that if that is what you believe is the place to go. Anything else, Leslie, you think we should respond to out of the chat right now?
Jacqueline has a question here, but I'm not sure if it got answered. Map shows us served and funded, but we don't have broadband, only DSL and wireless. Should they challenge?
Okay. Jacqueline, I'm going to speak about what should be true about the location and the particular standards that exist for the BEAD program and how locations get classified on the map. So what we have to consider when considering whether a location is served for purposes of the BEAD program are the quote reliable broadband technologies. And I use that phrase specifically because that is the phrase that the NTIA used in the notice of funding opportunity for the BEAD program. And so that is sort of our North Star in determining which kinds of service are considered when making those unserved, underserved, or served classifications. In addition, if you explore Michigan's initial proposal, Volume 1, we applied for and had approved 4 pre-challenge modifications that basically allow us to reclassify locations based on certain aspects of their service. And the reason I share all those things as background is you're talking about having DSL and wireless technology at your location. Licensed fixed wireless technology is considered a reliable broadband technology for purposes of the BEAD program. The federal guidelines tell us that we cannot consider unlicensed fixed wireless, we cannot consider satellite, but we can and in fact must consider licensed fixed wireless technologies. And so at that point, we look at the service speed, just like we would any other technology. We look at 25/3 as a threshold for not being underserved. We look at 100/20 as a threshold for not being underserved. And so anybody who has a licensed fixed wireless connection with a connection speed of above 100/20 that also meets the latency standards, things of that nature, all those aspects that make it a BEAD qualifying service, then you would be considered served. DSL technologies across the state of Michigan were affected by one of our licensed fixed wireless, by one of our pre-challenge modifications. Any location that is connected with DSL will be classified no higher than underserved, no matter what service speed is provided specifically by that DSL. And so what I am reading, Jacqueline, out of the sentences you've shared here in the chat are that the best available current information for your location shows that your location is served by a licensed fixed wireless technology that provides a connection speed of 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload, or faster. If that information is incorrect, then yes, a challenge would be appropriate. That was a whole lot of words to get to. If the information is wrong, then yes, you should challenge it. If the information is correct, then a challenge would not be necessary. Okay. I also see Justin's question here in the chat about whether the map will be publicly updated post NTIA approval. What you are likely to see from us next is the map that will be used for the subgrant applications. And so you'll see something that looks like a map of the state of Michigan with locations designated BEAD eligible, and it'll have that hex bin overlay that will be used for subgrant application selections. So that is probably the next thing that you are going to see from us in terms of a mapping interface. As I'm scrolling, as I'm scrolling down here, I see that Merritt and Jacqueline are talking about specifics around that location. If there's additional specifics, and maybe Jacqueline, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll talk about them in real time, that would be fantastic. Amy, I see, the question that Leslie's highlighting, reviewing the benefits and importance of registering as a community anchor institution. If you are designated as a community anchor institution, there is a different service threshold for considering whether your location is eligible for BEAD or not. If you are a community anchor institution and you have access to a gigabit symmetrical connection, then you are considered not eligible to be included in a BEAD grant. Anything lower than that for a community anchor institution would mean that a BEAD grant would be used to bring infrastructure that can provide that level of connection, which is to say fiber, to a point where you have access to that connection. This is necessary because kind of by definition, community anchor institutions are important, not just for like having a connection that they can use for their own routine business operations, but also for helping to improve connectivity and serving a broader population. And so that higher connection speed is considered appropriate. So if you work for an organization that falls anywhere in those categories of CAIs, then yes, we would like to make sure that you are designated correctly on the map so that if you need service brought to you because you don't currently have access to that gigabit symmetrical connection, then it's really important to be correctly represented on the map. I see Janet's question about when challenges will be processed. We are working as quickly as we are able, but we do recognize, just like you're highlighting here and others have highlighted, that it is taking some time to get through some challenges, to get through many challenges. We are working as quickly as we are able, but are not able to commit to any particular timeline. All right, and now I see Jacqueline is talking about, okay, Jacqueline, if you don't mind to go ahead and raise your hand, that might be helpful because I want to make sure that I'm getting all of the facts on the ground correctly. When we're talking about CAIs and the way connectivity is represented. Now, one important nuance here that picks up the discussion from earlier about how the FCC does not map or track community anchor institution locations is that when we collected that location, when we, MyHigh, collected that location information and placed all of those CAIs on the map, many of them, about 1/3 of them, essentially landed on top of an existing broadband serviceable location. And so there was information available specifically through the FCC BDC reporting about what providers said they offered at that specific location. In the places where that is true, the color of the triangle should be flagging off of the reported connection at that location. And so in the situation where, Jacqueline, you're describing, where your licensed fixed wireless is 10 by 1 and your DSL is 25 by 5, if that green triangle had landed on a broadband serviceable location that had that information reported, then it should be showing up red. The reason that that is not happening in that green triangle location that you're talking about is that green triangle must have landed on a point at the map, on the map, that did not have a broadband serviceable location represented. In that instance, MyHigh was required by NTIA to provide a preliminary designation, served or not served, or essentially BEAD eligible or not eligible, BEAD ineligible or BEAD eligible, right? That's two sides of the same coin. We did that by using a proximity analysis. So we have access to certain sources of information about where fiber infrastructure and other types of infrastructure are. So we took those CAI points that landed at places on the map other than right on top of a broadband serviceable location where there's information reported. And the mapping tool said if you're within 500 feet of a known fiber route and you're a CAI, you're considered to have access to that fiber. That was the best available methodology that we had for trying to figure out where CAIs might or might not have access to fiber. Again, in the places where that CAI landed on a BSL, that information about that location would supersede that proximity analysis. In the locations that it didn't, then the proximity analysis would be used for that estimate. So what you need to do here is hop into the portal for this green triangle and perform a challenge for CAI qualifying broadband is not available. It should be very simple because you'll be able to provide information about our only options are licensed fixed wireless and DSL. The evidence will be simple to collect, and then that challenge can be processed. We should have the opportunity to do some data cleanup on the back end. With that said, it's important that we get as many of these things cleaned up through the challenge process, through challenge submissions as possible. And so, Jacqueline, if you could go ahead, hop into the portal and submit that this is a CAI that does not have qualifying broadband service available, that would be the most efficient way to ensure that your location is in fact made eligible as it needs to be for BEAD. That was a really long answer for what felt like a straightforward question. I feel like that's how that's going in office hours, and I apologize for folks who are tired of hearing that. All right. What other questions do we have? Oh, I see Matt's question about receiving a rejection, being asked for more evidence. And yes, Justin, you're right on the money. Hopping onto the Code R section or the Code R section for qualifying evidence. Yes, that's exactly the place to go. I see Bob's question about municipal government fiber systems qualifying for BEAD funding. And the answer is, I don't know. And the reason is that no type of entity is prohibited from applying for BEAD funding. However, to receive a BEAD grant, you have to be able to walk through the qualification requirements, and your project has to qualify for the specifics of the BEAD program, namely to build out BEAD qualifying infrastructure to locations that are BEAD eligible. And so if you have a municipal government that either is or wishes to become an internet service provider, then you are absolutely eligible to develop and submit a BEAD application. But I don't know whether you're going to, whether your project qualifies for the BEAD program, whether your locations that you want to serve qualify for the BEAD program, and if you will have the most competitive application in those locations. So you certainly can apply, but I don't know if the particular project is going to be funded, is the answer for that question. I think we've got some hands up.
Jacqueline had her hand raised, but
yeah.
I'm not
Oh,
sure.
awesome.
I don't want to lower your hand in case you still had a question, Jacqueline. I didn't know if Jess had answered it.
Jacqueline, if you do want to unmute and have any additional details that you want to share. Okay, perfect. Autumn, I think you're up.
I just have a question about your cutoff for rejection feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So if your timeline goes past the 30th, because you're swamped, which I'm sure you are with trying to get through all the submissions, are those going to be able to be resubmitted if they're rejected on the 30th or later?
The good news is that a lot of the challenges that are coming in as bulk challenges. And so the determination, is made relatively efficiently. The submission deadline is what the submission deadline is. And we do not anticipate any further extension of the submission deadline. And so I'm circling around saying, unfortunately, we are going to use all reasonable best efforts to get people their feedback in advance of the submission deadline. And I cannot guarantee that that will happen for every challenge.
So even for the cutoff deadline of today at 5,
yeah,
it's not 100% guarantee.
Yes, we will get you feedback. We will do everything possible to get it in advance of that submission deadline, but I cannot guarantee it will happen. Yes.
Jess, we have a few new questions in the chat. Bob Worley is asking about municipal government fiber systems, if they qualify for BEAD funding.
Yeah. So the BEAD funding is specifically going to be for building out new infrastructure. Pre-existing infrastructure or projects that are underway right now would not be funded through the BEAD program. It's specifically for construction of new infrastructure. I think I also see, Matt, you're sharing some details about screenshot of new owner from the county. Again, without speaking to the specifics of any particular challenge, what I will speak to is the evidence requirements of the type C challenges. I'm going to hop to a specific page reference, so hang on while I find it for us. Okay. So what we are looking for with these type C challenges, trying to get locations identified as a community anchor institution, is very specific evidence that the CAI falls into one of those CAI categories. So in addition to the information that's available on page 28 and 29 of the user guide, which does say the evidence needs to include the official entity of the institution, the type of CAI out of that list of categories, an explanation of how that institution facilitates the use of broadband service, and then what I would also encourage you to do is take a look at Initial Proposal Volume 1. So if you're on our BEAD State Challenge Process website and scroll down, it's behind the button that says Read Michigan's BEAD Challenge Process. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this here in the chat. These links look so much better when Erin sends them through than I do, but the link I just added is Volume 1. And so that is going to give you information on pages, starts on page 8 of the document about community anchor institutions and the types. And so that will show you specifically what we're looking for in defining those categories. So that's where I would encourage you to focus if you do want to resubmit that challenge. I don't think I see any hands, and I don't think I see any new questions. Oh, I'm wrong. I see Amy is sharing the question, should I submit a challenge about if information about a provider is incorrect, but the location is already listed as unserved and funded through Robin? So what I would say here is if you want this location to, if you believe that this location is going to receive infrastructure through the Robin grant, then there's no need to make this location BEAD ineligible by trying to provide information about current service options. Ultimately, the most important thing that happens through the BEAD State Challenge process is the accurate classification of every location into the idea that this location should be BEAD eligible, this location should not be BEAD eligible, right? And so if the information that's showing in the State Challenge portal is correct about whether that location should be eligible for BEAD or should not, based on whether it's unserved or underserved, funded or not, then a challenge is not necessary if that BEAD classification is ultimately correct. If you have information that attempts to say that this location is not going to be connected through, in this case, you're saying the location is showing Robin, through this Robin enforceable commitment, then that is an acceptable type of challenge. If you are not facing a time or resource crunch and you had information that you wanted to report already providing service to that particular location, that challenge could be reviewed and accepted, but it would not change ultimately whether or not that location is eligible for BEAD funding. Does that make sense? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have additional clarifying questions about that.
Thank you, Jessica. That makes sense to me.
Okay, awesome. I see a few people filter um, in the last few minutes. So if you do have additional questions, go ahead, just raise your hand or put them in the chat and we'll get to them. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and hang on for a couple minutes, but then I'll pause the recording if we don't have anything else that folks would like to clarify at this point. Amy, I see your hand up. Go ahead and ask your questions.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm just filled with questions today.
I love it. We've got time.
Good. My question, I believe you already answered this, but when talking about subgrants, did you mention that the next round of subgrants that's going to go out is for infrastructure building?
So
yes.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it wouldn't matter if someone is registered as a community anchor institution for subgrant purposes. It's basically about speed.
Well, the community anchor institution designation does matter, and I'll talk a little bit about why. There's only one opportunity to develop these lists of which locations can be included in a BEAD subgrant application or not, and that is the BEAD state challenge process. So these determinations that we're making through this process will guide all of the rest of the BEAD program implementation. It's completely like flipping on its head the model from the Robin grants or the CMAQ grants. In those programs, the applications were made and then we finalized determinations about location eligibility through comment and objection. BEAD is completely the opposite. We do the state challenge process. We develop these final locations about, or these final determinations about which locations are eligible for the BEAD program, which is to say they are unserved and unfunded businesses or households. They are underserved and unfunded businesses or households. Or they are community anchor institutions below that gigabit symmetrical connection. So they're underserved only by maybe only by definition of that higher connection standard for CAIs. Those three types of situations are the ones that will be eligible for BEAD location or for BEAD infrastructure grant funding. So it really does matter, the community anchor institution designation right now, but also long into the future. So what happens next after the conclusion of the state challenge process, and ultimately after approval by NTIA of the results of the state challenge process, is that we will move forward with subgrant applications, at which time we take those three types of entities, unserved and unfunded, underserved and unfunded, CAI that requires higher service. And those will then be included in grant applications. We can't officially award, like we can't cut checks for any infrastructure grant for any build out until we demonstrate to NTIA that we have a plan, we, the state of Michigan, we, MyHigh, have a plan for how to use our $1.6 billion allocation to ensure that every one of those three categories of locations is included in one of the grants. And so we anticipate, a robust subgrant application process to get those locations built out. But it's really important that we get the categorization right now, because whether you appear on those three lists within those three categories or not right now determines whether or not you get included in one of those BEAD grants to have infrastructure built to that location, over the rest of the BEAD implementation process.
Justin has a question in the chat.
Yeah. Justin is asking about increasing visibility of area and MDU challenged locations. This is something that we have explored with the developers. It is for reasons that as a non-software developer, I probably cannot articulate, with full technical authority. It is more complicated than it seems like, and it has to do, I think, with the way that different challenges can kind of lay on top of each other because individual locations are challenged, but then it triggers the area challenge. And so, for whatever reason, while we recognize that this would be an incredibly useful feature for many people, it is not a feature that is going to be developed before April 30th. So that's the answer that I know you weren't hoping to hear, but it's the most honest answer. We're not going to be visualizing area challenge and MDU challenges directly on the map. And yes, absolutely. Always worth a shot to ask. Always worth a shot. Happy to hang on and address additional questions if folks have them. This is the time that, any curiosities you have about the state challenge process can be addressed. If we're at kind of a lull in the discussion, I will pause the recording for just a minute. Or actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that today for the very specific reason that it takes the video processing team more time to stitch those videos together when I do that. And so folks who choose to watch this back later are just going to have to manage through whatever pauses exist between now and 2:30 because I want to get this video up and made available as efficiently as possible. Oh, Merritt, I see. Chris, I'm not sure if that's you or if it's somebody else in your group, but go ahead and unmute and ask your questions.
Thanks, Jess. It is Chris. I just wanted to let folks know that it is worth taking a look at your completed items. So I'm looking at some of the items that our organization has submitted that has evidence rejected, and I see a pretty frequent reason is that the address in the evidence doesn't match the address that was on the map. And I don't know, I think that there could be, the addresses on the map aren't always the address that you would get your mail at. So I guess I'm just encouraging people to take a closer look if you've had the evidence rejected because of, not having the addresses in sync. That might be something to look into a little further.
Thanks, Chris. That's a really great recommendation. And yes, that is one of those common rejection reasons. Another common rejection reason has been evidence that doesn't meet the standards. Maybe it's because you provided an infrastructure map and we don't have the legend that helps us understand what the different aspects represented on that map are. Maybe it's for another reason. The things that I would recommend to decrease the likelihood of your challenge being rejected are very carefully reviewing not only the user guide, but also the memo on our website. It's called Read. You click on the button that's labeled Read Challenge Evidence Guidance Update. We walked through a couple of specific scenarios where we're just those are meant to give examples of like how you would combine different documents together to meet the evidence standards. You also can look at those bulleted lists of examples of the evidence requirements for various type of challenges. And thanks, Amy, for dropping that in the chat. You also can look at those examples for types of things that we're trying to look at. The core question that we keep trying to encourage folks to lift up is to think about whether somebody who doesn't know your community, doesn't know your company, could understand, based only on the information that's available in the evidence you submit, how the evidence that you're submitting demonstrates that the locations, that you have information relevant to the locations included in your challenge that meets the standards that were first established in initial proposal volume 1, and then they're explained in deeper detail with more examples in the user guide. So if you can make sure that the evidence you're turning in clearly meets all of the aspects that are laid out in the user guide in initial proposal volume 1, then you'll be in the best possible shape. That's the best available kind of general recommendation that we've got.
Amy?
Jessica, could you please repeat the speed requirements for community anchor institutions. I know you said gigabit symmetrical connection, but what would I be looking for on the map itself?
Yeah, that would be represented as 1,000 download, 1,000 upload.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The one I'm seeing is 1,000/35.
Mhm.
And so that would not be a gigabit symmetrical connection, you think?
That's right. Yep, that would not be, for purposes of a CAI only, that would not
Yes.
be served. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
David, and welcome. I do see that obviously you have just joined us, and there are a few other people who have joined to the office hours in progress. Feel free to go ahead and raise your hand if you do have questions you'd like to pose. And we're happy to, don't worry about repeating anything from earlier. We're happy to address whatever concerns you might have about the challenge process and provide as much information as folks are interested in. But right now we're kind of in a quiet period unless you do have things that you'd like to raise.
Amy Cheadle has a question.
Amy's question is, if a CAI already has the gigabit symmetrical service, so already has that BEAD qualifying service, are there other benefits to being registered as a community anchor institution? And at this point, I'm not sure that I can point to a particular benefit that exists, through the BEAD program. If you are a community anchor institution that needs to be connected, obviously, that's our first priority for finding those community anchor institutions that need to have infrastructure built to them through the BEAD program and making sure that those are correctly designated. That's just so that we can make sure that we're completing those lists of which locations get funded through the BEAD program correctly and with the most accurate information possible. And so I can't point to a specific BEAD program related advantage for being listed as a community anchor institution or not, if you already have that qualifying service. So if I was somebody who was going to try to work with CAIs to try to get challenges submitted, I would worry less about the ones that already have that qualifying service than I would about the ones that don't, just for purposes of meeting the deadline and setting my priorities. With that said, until the state challenge process, there has never before existed a single database or single list of community anchor institutions. And as somebody who cares about having complete and accurate data, I would like very much to get the list accurate and complete for purposes of understanding where CAIs are, which could affect, future digital equity work that might be funded through the digital equity team, or just could affect our ability to understand where the incredibly important work that happens at CAIs happens around the state. And so I want to answer twofold. The first is, if a community anchor institution already has that fiber connection and already has that BEAD qualifying access to that BEAD qualifying service, then I can't point you to a specific tangible benefit, but we sure would like to get that list as accurate as possible. That's just not the top priority of identifying those already served ones at this time for the funding purposes.
Merritt has a question.
All right. Chris's question is, are the evidence standards for rebutting a reverse availability challenge the same as rebutting an availability challenge? And so the way we name these in the user guide, if we look at them, are availability services not available challenges. and availability service is available challenges. And yes, the standards for rebutting and availability service is not available challenge are exactly the same evidence standards as what is required to submit, and availability service is available challenge. They're just mirror images of each other. I think that's the quickest answer I've given today, or shortest answer at least.
Mayor, is your hand up on purpose or accidentally?
Yes, I had a follow-up question to the question I just asked.
Thank you, Chris.
Yep. I just want to clarify. So
Yeah.
just so imagining that I was a local municipality and I was cruising through the open rebuttals to look at reverse availability challenges. That is to say, an ISP says, hey, this dot is marked red on the map, but really it's green because I could serve them within 10 days. So let's just say the municipality is looking at that and they say, you know, for whatever reason, I'm pretty darn sure they couldn't serve that location within 10 days. So the standard for evidence for that would be the same as if you were just challenging that provider if they had already claimed it in the first place. If the map had said so, it'd be the same. So you could go to their website and look up that address, and if it said, you know, I don't really think we serve that address, you could get a screenshot of that and submit it. Okay, just clarifying. Thank you so much.
We have information about that, but I'm not sure if it's public or not. So I'll let Jess take your question about the DE capacity grant.
Mm-hmm. And similarly to Erin, I don't want to step on our digital equity team. I don't see Allie in the users of the call today. We've prioritized having our staff actually in the challenge portal and reviewing challenges as they're able. How can communities interested in DE stay informed about DE activities? The very best thing to do is to subscribe to the My High newsletter if you have not done so already. Now, the Partnership Roundtable distribution list does not necessarily tie directly into the newsletter list. So if you get emails from me with all of these office hours reminders or the important updates about the state challenge process, but you don't get the My High newsletter emails, then let us know if you'd like to be added to the newsletter. That said, the very easiest way to do it is to just subscribe, and we'll grab you the link real quick where you can subscribe. But Chris, I think you're completely correct to observe that the DE capacity grant notice of funding opportunity was published. It is available for applications, and therefore, I think you can expect more regular updates and announcements about what is happening with this digital equity capacity grant by simple virtue of the fact that it's available and we aren't waiting for that notice of funding opportunity to be released anymore. Oh, and there's Allie. Perfect.
I was gonna say, I heard the call. I feel like Mrs. Doubtfire, like help is on the way, dear.
There you go.
Yes. What DE questions do we have?
You can see right in the chat here, Merritt is asking, can you give an update on digital equity? Have you applied for the capacity grant and how communities interested in DE can stay informed about My High's DE activities?
Sure.
So just everything.
Well, I feel comfortable and confident enough to make this announcement public. But as of Tuesday at 4:30, My High did submit our digital equity capacity grant application for consideration by the NTIA for an approximate $20.5 million. I say approximate because there was a challenge process that we don't have the results of yet. It's difficult to talk about challenge process when we're in office hours about challenge process, but so we don't know what our official allocation is, but we are anticipating $20.5 million. From my understanding, we were the second state in the nation to be able to submit, so very, very proud of that. For the second question as to how communities who are interested in DE stay informed, our newsletter through and through is the best way to be able to stay engaged with what we are doing at My High, because I don't have any, solid next steps yet about what will be happening for our capacity grant. That's the best way to do it. That way everybody gets the same information at the same time as well. So thanks for dropping that link in the chat there too, Jess. But yeah. Exciting.
It is exciting, and it was killing me to defer when I knew there was good stuff. So I'm glad we were able to get you on the call.
Yes. Yeah. I just happened to look up on my right screen after I was doing challenges. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I can hang out in the background if there are other questions about DE that come up, but I will kick it back to you all.
Yeah. We're kind of sitting in a little bit of a quiet period here. We've addressed a lot of great questions earlier in the call. And, we've made the commitment that we'll be available until 2:30, and we certainly intend to uphold that. But if nobody has questions, then I'm just going to go ahead and mute myself and similarly to Allie, do my challenge-related work on the right-hand screen until somebody lets us know that they've got a question. I see a question in the chat here from Mark that says, what are the best ways to collect the most accurate data for locations? Mark, I wonder if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and share just a little bit more information about um, what it is that your goal is, um, where you're looking for information, what kind of information, like what what challenges you're thinking about, what types of challenges, as you're asking that question. That would help us give a more useful answer. Or, if you'd rather not speak on camera, that's fine too, and you want to just share some additional details in the chat. That would also be another way to help you with the most useful information there. Notice that we are rapidly closing in on 2:30. We're just a couple minutes before it's 2:27 on my clock. So there certainly is time, Mark, if you do want to share those additional details with us in the chat. But I want to make sure that we respect people's time. So we are going to start to look toward wrapping up. Whether you're Mark or whether you're anybody else, if you have additional questions, this is the time to slip them in under the wire. We will do one more set of office hours before the challenge submission period concludes. That is going to be on Monday, 12:30 to 2:30. The email I sent out last night did contain a link specifically for that meeting. If you are on this call and you happen to need that link again, just let me know, and we will be happy to share that. In addition, if folks do have questions, the very first thing, of course, we would want you to do is hop into the resources available on our website. We really believe that most questions about the challenge process are addressed in those materials. That's why we wrote them and why we posted them. But if you do have additional questions after you do that, then the email address that Erin shared a little earlier in the chat, leo-my-highspeedinternet@michigan.gov, is a place where you can reach us. So we're happy to connect with folks in any of those available ways. I see now that it's 2:29. So unless folks do have additional questions, then we are going to go ahead and wrap up the meeting. Just with a lot of thanks. We certainly recognize that this challenge process is a labor-intensive process on all sides. We are going to continue to do everything that we can to get information back to you about the status of your challenges, their acceptance or rejection, as quickly as we're able. We also know and recognize that you guys are doing tons of incredible work, both in your data gathering and then in the challenge submissions. And we just appreciate your engagement in this process and everybody's commitment to ensuring the success of Michigan SPEED program. So thank you for your time today and for all that you are doing to participate in the state challenge. Talk to you again soon.